In the frost-carved fjords of Vestfold, where the northern winds carry echoes of ancient songs and battles long forgotten, a fierce woman warrior made a choice that would forever alter the course of her saga. Sigrid Haraldsdottir, a shield-maiden, with battle-scarred hands and a heart hardened by rejection, accepted a marriage pact with Bjorn Grimsson, a war-weary raider whose nightmares still echoed with the screams of fallen comrades. Their union lasted precisely 13 days before Sigrid uncovered a truth so profound it would shatter everything she believed about honor, loyalty, and the hidden price of Viking glory. Before we delve deeper into this tale, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story of fierce warriors and hidden truths resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's saga reveals what happened when Sigrid finally confronted Bjorn with the blood-soaked secret she discovered beneath the floorboards of his longhouse. The bitter winds of winter's end howled across the settlement of Ravnfjord, a modest collection of longhouses nestled between towering mountains and the steel-gray waters of the fjord. Smoke curled from roof vents, carrying the scents of pine and hearth fires into the crisp air as villagers hurried about their morning tasks. The sun had barely crested the eastern peaks, casting long shadows across the muddy pathways where Sigrid Haraldsdottir strode with purpose, her spine straight despite the whispers that followed in her wake. At 26 winters, Sigrid's face bore the weathered look of someone who had stood against both elements and expectations. Her auburn hair, braided tightly against her scalp on the sides and flowing wild down her back, marked her as different even before one noticed the small axe hanging from her belt. A warrior's tool, not a woman's implement. The leather of her tunic was worn but well-maintained, adorned with subtle patterns of ravens that her mother had stitched before illness had taken her 5 winters past. Sigrid wasn't born to defy tradition. Her father, Harald Olafsson, had been a respected shipbuilder, crafting vessels that carried raiders across the whale road to distant shores. Her mother, Frida, had been skilled in healing arts and respected for her wisdom. They had raised their daughter with stories of shield-maidens who fought alongside men, women whose names were sung in the great halls. But stories were one thing. Living as such a woman was another matter entirely in a settlement that valued traditional roles. When Sigrid was 12, raiders from the east had attacked Ravnfjord, while most of the warriors were away. She had grabbed her father's old sword, too heavy for her young arms, and stood beside the few remaining defenders. She didn't kill any attackers that day, but she'd fought with such fierce determination that the village elder, Gudmund, had reluctantly allowed her to begin training with the shield wall when she begged for the chance afterward. "The gods have given her a warrior's spirit," her father had said proudly, though his voice carried a note of worry beneath. "Who are we to deny the path they've chosen for her?" By 16, she could outfight most of the young men in the settlement. By 20, she had sailed on her first raid, returning with a scar across her shoulder and a fierce light in her eyes that made the marriage-minded mothers of Ravnfjord keep their sons at a distance. What man wanted a wife who might challenge his authority or, worse, shame him with her skill in battle? Now, as the seasons had turned nearly 7 times since that first voyage, Sigrid found herself increasingly isolated. Her father had died 2 winters ago when a massive oak timber had slipped from its supports in his workshop, crushing his chest. With no family left and her reputation as too fierce firmly established, she survived by hunting, trading furs and meat, and occasionally serving as a guard for merchants traveling between settlements. On this particular morning, Sigrid was headed to the great hall where Jarl Eriksson, the settlement's leader, would be holding council. Rumors had spread through Ravnfjord that a new trading agreement with settlements to the south would be discussed, perhaps bringing opportunities for those willing to guard the trade routes against bandits and rival clans. "Sigrid Thunderfist," called a mocking voice as she passed the smithy. Halfdan, the blacksmith's son and one of the few men close to her age still unmarried, leaned against the doorframe with a smirk twisting his handsome features. "Going to ask the Jarl if you can lead our next raid. Perhaps you should ask for a husband instead, before your womb shrivels like a winter apple." Several men lounging nearby chuckled, their eyes watching for her reaction. Sigrid had learned long ago that responding to such taunts only provided more fuel for gossip. She fixed Halfdan with a level stare, her hand casually resting on the haft of her axe. "When I want advice on my womb, Halfdan, I'll ask your mother. She seems to have successfully produced a half-man at least." She kept walking as the other. Men's laughter turned against Halfdan, whose face flushed red with anger. "No man will ever claim you, shield-maiden," he called after her. "Too much iron in your blood when they need a woman with warmth in her heart." The words shouldn't have stung after so many years of similar comments, but Sigrid felt the familiar twist of pain beneath her ribs. Not because she desperately wanted marriage, the gods knew she had seen enough unhappy unions in Ravnfjord, but because such comments constantly reminded her of her precarious position in the community. Without family ties or a husband's protection, her status hung by a thread of the Jarl's tolerance and her own usefulness. The great hall rose before her, its carved wooden posts depicting the gods and heroes of old tales. 2 guards flanked the Yic entrance, nodding to Sigrid with the respect accorded to a fellow warrior, if not the warmth given to a friend. Inside, the hall's central hearth cast flickering light across gathered villagers seated on benches. The smoke-filled air carried scents of burning pine, mead, and unwashed bodies. The familiar perfume of Viking governance. Jarl Erik Thorson sat in his high seat at the far end, a bear of a man whose red beard was now streaked with gray. His son Rorik, barely 20 summers and already developing his father's bulk, sat at his right hand. The Jarl's counselors, the settlement's most prosperous farmers, merchants, and ship captains, occupied the closest benches. Sigrid found a place near the back, perching on the edge of a bench beside Thyra, the herb woman who had taken over healing duties after Sigrid's mother died. "You've chosen an interesting morning to attend council," Thyra murmured, her aged fingers working a small piece of wood with a carving knife. "The raids to the west have been postponed." "Why?" Sigrid asked, surprised. Spring raids were tradition, timed to the improving weather when settlements across the sea would be unprepared after the winter. 3 ships returned from the northern settlements last night, Thyra replied, her voice low. "Brought a man named Bjorn Grimsson seeking the Jarl's protection and offering warriors for our raids in exchange." Before Sigrid could ask more, the Jarl rose from his seat, and the hall fell silent. "People of Ravnfjord," Jarl Erik's voice boomed across the gathering. "The gods have blown strange winds our way this season. Our planned raids to the western shores must wait. I have received word that King Harald of the South has set his eyes northward, seeking to claim our fjords and forests for his growing kingdom." Murmurs spread through the hall like ripples on still water. King Harald's ambitions were well known, but most had believed the mountains and difficult coastal passages would keep his attention focused on easier conquests to the east. "Last night," the Jarl continued, 3 ships arrived from Nordhaven, where Harald's forces have already claimed allegiance. They bring Bjorn Grimsson, once thane to Jarl Hakon before Hakon bent his knee to Harald rather than face destruction. He gestured, and a figure rose from beside one of his counselors, a man Sigrid hadn't noticed earlier. Tall and broad-shouldered, the stranger moved with the fluid grace of a practiced warrior despite his apparent age, which Sigrid guessed to be past 35 winters. His beard was dark and neatly trimmed, framing a face that might once have been handsome before a scar had slashed across his left cheek, pulling his mouth into a permanent half-grimace. His left arm hung slightly stiff at his side, suggesting an old injury. But it was the man's eyes that caught Sigrid's attention, gray as the winter sea and carrying the haunted look she had seen in warriors who had witnessed too much death. Eyes that assessed the hall with the wary calculation of someone who no longer expected safety anywhere. "Bjorn Grimsson brings 20 seasoned warriors loyal to him rather than Harald," the Jarl explained. "And more importantly, he brings knowledge of Harald's strategies and weaknesses. In exchange for settlement here, These warriors will help defend Ravnfjord when Harald's forces inevitably turn their gaze toward us. Objections immediately erupted from several council members. How do we know this isn't Harald's ploy to place spies among us? Demanded Gunnar, a wealthy merchant. 20 men, 20 families, where will they all settle? Our hunting grounds already strain to feed our people in harsh winters, called another voice. Jarl Erik raised his hand for silence. These concerns are valid, but I would remind you that refusing these warriors means they may offer their swords to other settlements, perhaps even return to Harald's service when hunger gnaws at their children's bellies. The Jarl gestured to Bjorn, who stepped forward, his movements measured and controlled. Speak, Bjorn Grimsson. Tell my people why they should welcome you among them. Bjorn surveyed the hall, his gray eyes seeming to take measure of every face, before he spoke. His voice, when it came, was deep but quiet, forcing the crowd to lean forward to hear him, a tactic Sigrid recognized as one used by leaders who wished their words to carry weight. People of Ravnfjord, I do not come begging. My men and I have wealth taken in raids, skills in battle, and strong backs for work. We seek not charity, but alliance. He paused, his gaze sweeping the hall. I have seen Harald's armies crush settlements, larger than yours, burning longhouses with families still inside when resistance continued too long. I have watched proud jarls kneel rather than see their people slaughtered. A chill silence fell across the gathering as Bjorn's words painted vivid images of a fate none wished to contemplate. My men are oath-sworn to me, not Harald. We left, when our jarl broke faith with his people by surrendering without battle. We seek a new home among those willing to stand against tyranny. His scarred face remained impassive, but something fierce flickered behind his eyes. Judge us by our deeds in the coming battles, not by your fears of strangers. The simple dignity in his words impressed Sigrid, though she noticed he offered no details about why they had truly left Nordhaven or what specific knowledge of Harald's strategies he possessed. A wise omission in a hall full of unknown faces, but one that left many questions unanswered. Discussion erupted once more, with council members debating the merits and risks of accepting these warriors. Sigrid listened carefully, noting which influential voices seemed to favor acceptance and which remained suspicious. After nearly an hour of heated debate, Jarl Erik called for another silence. I have heard your concerns, he announced, and I have made my decision. Bjorn Grimsson and his warriors will be granted settlement rights in the abandoned steading at the eastern edge of our territory. They will contribute to our defense, share their knowledge of our enemy, and abide by our laws. His gaze hardened as he looked directly at Bjorn. But know this, betrayal will be met with death, not just for you, but for all who follow you. The ravens will feast well if you bring Harald's violence to our shores through treachery. Bjorn met the Jarl's stare without flinching. My men and I would expect nothing less. We offer our swords and our loyalty for as long as Ravnfjord stands against Harald. The Jarl nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then it is settled. We will hold a feast tonight to welcome our new shield brothers. He turned to address the broader gathering. With the threat of Harald's expansion, our planned raids must change. We cannot leave our settlement weakly defended, yet we need the resources raiding brings. Sigrid leaned forward, suddenly more interested. Changes to the raiding. Plans might offer opportunities she wouldn't normally have. Smaller parties will target closer settlements along the southern coast, the Jarl continued. Quick strikes with immediate return rather than extended journeys. Each ship will need experienced warriors familiar with those waters. As the meeting concluded and people began to file out of the hall, Sigrid remained seated, her mind working through the implications. Smaller raid parties meant they would need every capable fighter, including, perhaps, a shield-maiden whose skill had been proven despite her gender. The arrival of Bjorn and his warriors might actually improve her chances of joining a raid this season, as the settlement would now have additional protection in the absence of raiding parties. Thyra touched her arm gently. You're thinking of volunteering for the raids, she said. It wasn't a question. They'll need every sword, Sigrid replied. The old woman's fingers tightened briefly on her arm. Be careful, child. Times of uncertainty make people cling more desperately to tradition, not less. Many will say a woman's place is defending the home settlement, not raiding abroad. Sigrid watched as Bjorn Grimsson spoke quietly with the Jarl and his son near the high seat. And what do you say, Thyra? The herb woman's weathered face creased in a sad smile. I say the gods weave our fates as they will, and fighting against the pattern they've chosen for you has only brought you pain. Perhaps it's time to see where your thread truly belongs in their tapestry. With that cryptic remark, Thyra rose and shuffled away, leaving Sigrid alone on the bench. As if sensing her gaze, Bjorn Grimsson glanced in her direction, his gray eyes meeting hers across the hall. For a moment, something like recognition flashed across his features, not of her personally, but perhaps of something he saw in her. Then his attention was claimed by one of the Jarl's counselors, and the moment passed. Sigrid rose and made her way outside, squinting in the bright spring sunlight after the dim interior of the hall. The settlement had returned to its normal rhythms, children running between buildings, women working looms set up to catch the daylight, men repairing fishing nets and tools. None of them yet knew how their lives might change with Harold's ambitions and the arrival of 20 warriors with divided loyalties. As she walked toward her small dwelling at the settlement's edge, Sigrid's thoughts remained on the coming changes. Whatever opportunities the new situation might present, she knew she would need to move carefully. The arrival of Bjorn Grimsson and his men had shifted the delicate balance of Ravnfjord politics, and Sigrid had survived this long by understanding when to push against tradition and when to appear to respect it. Tonight's feast would be her opportunity to assess these newcomers more thoroughly, particularly their leader, whose battle-weary eyes had seemed to see something in her that others in Ravnfjord had long ago dismissed. Whether that recognition would prove beneficial or dangerous remained to be seen. One thing was certain. The coming season would reshape Ravnfjord's future, and Sigrid intended to ensure her place within it, whatever the cost. If you're enjoying this saga so far, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us and helps us bring more Viking stories to life for you. Sigrid's dwelling stood apart from the others, a small but sturdy structure built against the trunk of a massive pine that offered some protection from the northern winds. She had constructed it herself after her father's death, refusing the Jarl's offer of a place in the communal longhouse where unmarried women typically lived. Independence had its price in isolation, but she preferred solitude to the constant scrutiny of village matrons who viewed her choices with disapproval. Inside, the single room was spare but orderly. Weapons hung on one wall, her father's sword, too heavy for practical combat but kept for sentimental reasons, her own preferred axe and shield, and a finely crafted bow she'd traded for with a merchant from the eastern settlements. Furs covered a sleeping platform. A small hearth occupied the center, and wooden chests contained her few possessions. The only decorative items were a carved wooden raven her father had made, and a small silver Thor's hammer that had been her mother's. Sigrid shed her outer tunic and splashed cold water from a bucket onto her face. The feast tonight would be her opportunity to observe Bjorn Grimsson and his men more closely, perhaps even find a way to position herself for inclusion in the upcoming raids. She needed to appear both capable and unthreatening, a difficult balance she had never quite mastered. From a chest, she withdrew her best clothing, a deep blue wool tunic embroidered at the neck and cuffs with intricate knotwork, a pair of fitted trousers rather than the traditional women's dress, and a belt with silver decorations that had been her mother's. She would wear her hair in a more feminine style to soften her appearance, but her axe would remain at her hip, a compromise between acknowledging the feast's social nature and maintaining her identity as a warrior. As she prepared, Sigrid considered the newcomer's arrival and its implications. Bjorn Grimsson and his 20 warriors represented a significant addition to Ravnfjord's fighting strength. Their presence might ease some of the settlement's defensive concerns, but 20 men also meant 20 mouths to feed from limited winter, stores, and potentially 20 more voices arguing against a woman's place in the shield wall. Yet something about Bjorn Grimsson nagged at her thoughts. Unlike most men in positions of authority, he had looked at her without immediate dismissal. That brief moment when their eyes had met across the hall had contained something like recognition, not of her personally, but perhaps of something within her that others failed to see. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when Sigrid left her dwelling and made her way toward the great hall. Already, the sounds of preparation could be heard, voices raised in conversation, the clatter of wooden platters, the occasional burst of laughter. Feasts in Ravnfjord were not common events, particularly at winter's end when food stores ran low, but the Jarl clearly felt that formally welcoming these new allies warranted the expense. The main path through the settlement bustled with activity, as families dressed in their finest clothes made their way toward the hall. Children darted between adults, excited by the promise of music and stories. Young women walked in groups, casting speculative glances toward the hall where 20 unmarried warriors would soon be seated. Young men swaggered with exaggerated confidence, already planning how to impress both the newcomers and available women with tales of their bravery. Sigrid walked alone, as always. She noted the sidelong glances from other women, the whispers behind hands as she passed. Her choice of trousers rather than a dress would fuel gossip, but she had long ago stopped caring what others thought of her attire. The ability to move freely was more important than conforming to expectations that had never suited her. Near the hall entrance, she encountered Gudrun, a young widow whose husband had died in a fishing accident the previous summer. Unlike most, in the settlement, Gudrun had always shown Sigrid kindness, perhaps because she too understood what it meant to exist outside the normal patterns of village life. "You look well," Gudrun said, her small daughter clinging to her skirts. "The blue suits your coloring." "As does the green for you," Sigrid replied, gesturing to Gudrun's embroidered overdress. "Will you sit with me during the feast?" Gudrun smiled apologetically. "I promise to help serve tonight. Many hands are needed with so many guests." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They say some of these warriors are high-born men from wealthy families driven out by political quarrels rather than true loyalty to their leader." "Where did you hear this?" Sigrid asked, immediately interested. "My brother helps in the Jarl's stables. He overheard 2 of the newcomers arguing about whether they had made the right choice in following Bjorn, rather than seeking King Harald's mercy." This information added another layer to Sigrid's assessment of the situation. If some of Bjorn's men questioned their allegiance to him, it could create dangerous divisions within Ravnfjord if conflict with Harald's forces came to pass. "Thank you for telling me," Sigrid said. "Keep your ears open tonight. I'd value hearing anything else you learn." Gudrun nodded, then guided her daughter toward the side entrance where serving women were gathering. Sigrid continued to the main doors, where the hall guards waved her through with the respect accorded to a recognized fighter, if not the warmth given to more conventional women. Inside, the great hall had been transformed. Additional torches lined the walls, casting a golden glow over the gathered villagers. The central hearth blazed with a fire built from fragrant pine and birch, filling the space with warmth and light. Trestle tables formed a U-shape around the hearth, with the Jarl's high seat at the head position. Musicians were tuning instruments. In one corner, preparing to offer entertainment once the serious business of eating was concluded. Sigrid found a place at the outer edge of one table, positioning herself where she could observe the entire hall while remaining somewhat removed from the center of activities. She noticed Bjorn's warriors were being strategically seated throughout the gathering rather than clustered together, a wise precaution on the Jarl's part to encourage integration while preventing them from forming an isolated unit within the feast. Conversations hushed momentarily as Jarl Erik entered with his family and counselors. Behind them came Bjorn Grimsson, now dressed in finer clothing that bespoke his rank as a leader. A silver arm ring glinted at his bicep, and a well-crafted sword hung at his hip. The scar across his face stood out starkly in the torchlight, giving him a fierce appearance despite his formal attire. The Jarl gestured for Bjorn to sit at his right hand, a position of high honor that would not go unnoticed by the settlement's established warriors. Sigrid watched the faces of those men, noting the flickers of resentment that crossed some expressions. Such positioning would fuel resentments and rivalries in the days to come. Once all were seated, the Jarl rose and raised his drinking horn. "People of Ravnfjord, we gather tonight to welcome new shield brothers to our settlement. May the gods bless this union of strength against common enemies, and may our combined might ensure our children grow old in freedom, never knowing the yoke of Harold's rule." Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathering. Fear of King Harold's expansion united them, whatever other divisions might exist. "Bjorn Grimsson," the Jarl continued, turning to his honored guest, "drink with me to seal our alliance. Your warriors are now Ravnfjord's warriors. Our battles are yours, and yours are ours." Bjorn rose, accepting a ceremonial horn from a serving woman. "To shared victories and honorable deaths," he said, his deep voice carrying through the hall. "May the All-Father watch over our combined strength, and may the weavers of fate smile upon this new thread in our sagas." The formal words were met with approval. Both men drank deeply, sealing their pact before the assembled witnesses. With the ceremonial opening complete, servants began bringing forth food, platters of roasted meats, bread, cheese, and early spring vegetables preserved from the previous season. As the feast progressed, Sigrid ate sparingly, more interested in observing the interactions around her than in the food itself. She watched as Bjorn's warriors gradually relaxed, engaging with the locals and accepting refills of their drinking horns. Some were clearly making efforts to charm the unmarried women, while others spoke seriously with established village warriors about weapons, tactics, and battles they had fought. Bjorn himself remained more reserved, speaking mainly with the Jarl and his counselors. Sigrid noticed he drank less than those around him, maintaining his awareness while appearing to participate fully in the festivities, a wise approach for a leader in unfamiliar territory. Midway through the feast, one of Bjorn's men, a tall warrior with a red beard who had been introduced as Hakon, rose unsteadily to his feet, clearly deep in his cups. "A toast," he called, raising his horn, "to new beginnings and the fine women of Ravnfjord, whose beauty outshines even the maidens of Nordhavn." This brought cheers from the local men and blushes from several young women. Emboldened by the response, Hakon continued, his voice growing louder, "And to our leader, Bjorn the Grim, who has led us to safety rather than surrender. Though some questioned leaving our homes, none can doubt his wisdom now that we've seen the wealth of this settlement and the—" He paused, his eyes roaming appreciatively over several women. "Hospitality offered here." Sigrid noted how Bjorn's expression tightened almost imperceptibly at these words. The implication that they had fled rather than fought, and the suggestion that Ravnfjord's resources and women were viewed as prizes to be claimed, would not sit well with their hosts. Before the moment could sour, Bjorn stood. "My friend speaks with more mead than wisdom," he said, drawing laughter that eased the tension. "What he means to say is that we are grateful for Ravnfjord's welcome, and will earn our place here through loyal service, not empty words." He placed a heavy hand on Hakon's shoulder, firmly guiding him back to his seat. The moment passed, but Sigrid had observed enough to confirm Gudrun's information. Not all of Bjorn's men were fully committed to their leader's choice, and some viewed Ravnfjord as merely a convenient shelter rather than a new home deserving of loyalty. As the eating portion of the feast concluded, the tables were pushed back to create space in the center of the hall. Musicians struck up lively tunes, and dancing began, an activity Sigrid typically avoided. She remained at the edge of the gathering, content to observe as couples formed and moved through traditional patterns. "You do not dance, shield-maiden?" The voice startled her. Bjorn Grimsson had approached silently, moving with the stealth of a practiced warrior despite his size. Up close, his gray eyes were even more striking, clear and assessing, set in a face weathered by sun, wind, and battle. Sigrid straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "I find my feet better suited to the rhythm of battle than music." A hint of amusement touched his expression. Yet both require similar skills: timing, balance, anticipation of your partner's movements. "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but in battle, my partner's goal is not to impress me with his footwork, but to separate my head from my shoulders." This drew a low chuckle from Bjorn, a sound that suggested genuine amusement rather than mockery. "A fair point. I've always found dance to be the more dangerous activity. A misstep in battle merely kills you, while a misstep in dancing humiliates you before all." The unexpected humor surprised her. This was not the grim, haunted warrior she had observed. In the council meeting, "You're Sigrid Haraldsdottir," he said, making it a statement rather than a question. "They speak of you in the settlement, the shield-maiden who refuses to set aside her axe for a loom." She tensed, expecting the usual criticism veiled as concern. "And do you find that as troubling as the others do?" Bjorn considered her question seriously. "I find capability is too rare a quality to waste because it comes in an unexpected form." He gestured toward the dancers. "Half those men boast of courage they've never tested, while you've already proven yours in battle from what I hear. Which should I value more as a leader?" The straightforward assessment caught her off guard. Before she could respond, he continued, his voice lowered so only she could hear. "I saw you watching today's council meeting with more understanding than most. What did you make of our arrival?" Direct question was unusual. Men of authority rarely sought a woman's opinion on political matters, especially not a woman already deemed troublesome for her unwomanly pursuits. Sigrid chose her words carefully. "I think your arrival benefits both sides, but trust will need to be earned. Some of your men seem less convinced of your path than others." Bjorn's expression revealed nothing, but she sensed her observation had struck home. "Perceptive," he said finally. "You're right to be cautious. 20 men bring 20 different reasons for following me, and not all are rooted in loyalty." His candor surprised her. "Why tell me this?" A wry smile touched his scarred lips. "Because you were already aware of it, and because I suspect you. Understand what it means to make difficult choices and face others' doubts." Before she could respond, a commotion near the center of the hall drew their attention. Halfdan, the blacksmith's son who had mocked Sigrid earlier, stood swaying slightly, clearly deep in his cups. He was facing one of Bjorn's younger warriors, their postures suggesting a confrontation brewing. "You think you can come here and claim our women, stranger?" Halfdan's voice carried above the music, which faltered and then stopped altogether. "You haven't earned that right yet." The younger warrior, barely 20 by Sigrid's estimation, raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I only asked the lady to dance. She accepted freely. Gira has been promised to me," Halfdan insisted, though Sigrid knew this was a lie. Gira, the miller's daughter who stood embarrassed between the two men, had repeatedly rejected Halfdan's advances. Bjorn sighed. "Excuse me," he said to Sigrid. "It seems my responsibilities call." She watched as he moved with surprising grace through the crowd, reaching the confrontation just as Halfdan's hand moved to the knife at his belt. "Enough." Bjorn's voice cut through the tension, not raised but carrying authority that made both younger men turn toward him. "We are guests here, Eric," he said to his warrior. "Choose another partner for this dance." The young warrior nodded, stepping back immediately in deference to his leader. Halfdan, however, was not as easily pacified. "You command your dog well?" "Enough," he sneered, emboldened by drink and wounded pride. "But you bring danger to our doors with your running from Harold." Are we to die defending you when he comes hunting his deserters?" A dangerous silence fell across the hall. The accusation of cowardice hung in the air, a challenge that could not be ignored without losing face before both communities. Sigrid saw the Jarl starting to rise from his seat, preparing to intervene, but Bjorn spoke first. "Your concern is understandable," he said, his tone controlled despite the provocation. "Let me ease your mind." In a movement almost too swift to follow, Bjorn's hand shot out, catching Halfdan's wrist as the younger man reached again for his knife. With seemingly effortless strength, he twisted until Halfdan's knees buckled, bringing him down without a sound other than the sharp intake of breath from those watching. "If I were running from Harald," Bjorn continued conversationally, as if he weren't holding a man immobilized with one hand, "I would have chosen a settlement much further from his reach. I came to Ravnfjord because it occupies strategic ground that must be defended." He released Halfdan, who stumbled back, rubbing his wrist. "And because your people have a reputation for valuing strength and honor above empty boasting." He turned to the gathering at large. "My men and I did not flee battle. We refused to follow a leader who surrendered without one. There is a difference that warriors understand." His gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of Ravnfjord's established fighters, many of whom nodded in acknowledgement of the distinction. "Now," Bjorn continued, his voice lightening, "I believe we were celebrating an alliance, not testing it. Musicians, if you would be so kind." As the music resumed and the crowd's attention dispersed, Sigrid found herself reassessing Bjorn Grimsson. He had defused a potentially explosive situation without bloodshed, but also without losing face. A difficult balance that spoke of experience in both battle and leadership. Moreover, his willingness to engage directly with her, treating her observations with respect rather than dismissal, suggested he might view her capabilities differently than most men in authority. Perhaps the arrival of these warriors might offer unexpected opportunities. If raids were to be conducted with smaller parties, experienced fighters would be at a premium. And if Bjorn Grimsson held influence with the Jarl, his support might make the difference in whether a shield-maiden would be included in those raids. As the feast continued around her, Sigrid watched Bjorn return to the Jarl's side, their heads bent in serious conversation despite the festivities. Whatever game fate had set in motion with the arrival of these warriors, Sigrid was determined to find her place within it, not as a woman seeking a husband, but as a warrior seeking her rightful place in battle. The night was still young, and many more observations could be made before its end. For now, she would watch, listen, and plan her approach. The opportunity she had sought for so long might finally be within reach, if only she could navigate the shifting alliances and tensions that Bjorn Grimsson's arrival had set in motion. And if some small part of her remained intrigued by the warrior who had spoken to her as an equal rather than an oddity, well, that was a weakness she would examine another time, when the stakes were not so high and the future of Ravnfjord didn't hang in the balance. Dawn broke over Ravnfjord with fingers of pale gold stretching across the fjord's still waters. Sigrid had risen before first light, her mind too restless, with thoughts of the previous night's feast to allow for further sleep. The encounter with Bjorn Grimsson had left her unsettled, not with fear or anger, but with an uncomfortable sense of possibility she had long ago learned to distrust. She moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, stoking the hearth embers to life, splashing icy water on her face to chase away lingering fatigue, and consuming a simple breakfast of hard bread and dried meat. Physical activity would clear her head better than brooding. She strapped her axe to her belt and set out for the training grounds at the settlement's northern edge. The morning air carried the clean scent of pine from the surrounding forests and salt from the fjord. Few villagers were stirring so early, allowing Sigrid to walk without the usual accompaniment of stares and whispers. She savored these quiet moments when she could move through Ravnfjord as just another of its inhabitants, rather than an oddity to be commented upon. The training ground was a flat area of packed earth surrounded by roughly hewn wooden posts used for weapons practice. At this early hour, she expected to find it deserted. Instead, a solitary figure moved through the space with fluid precision, a sword flashing in the early morning light as its wielder executed a complex series of strikes against an imaginary opponent. Bjorn Grimsson had stripped to his trousers. Despite the morning chill, his upper body bare except for binding around his left shoulder, evidence of the old injury she had noticed the day before. Scars marked his torso, telling stories of battles survived and wounds endured. Despite his years and injuries, he moved with the controlled grace of a warrior who had honed his skills through countless fights. Sigrid paused at the edge of the training ground, reluctant to interrupt what appeared to be a private ritual. For several minutes, she simply observed, noting the disciplined precision of his movements, the economy of effort that spoke of experience rather than youthful showmanship. This was not practice for show, but the necessary maintenance of skills that had kept him alive through years of raiding and warfare. As if sensing her presence, Bjorn completed a final sequence and turned toward her, his breathing only slightly, quickened by the exertion. Sweat sheened his skin despite the cool air, catching the early light as he lowered his sword. "Shield-maiden," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "You rise early." "As do you," she replied, stepping onto the training ground. "I thought I would have this space to myself. My apologies for disrupting your plans." He reached for a tunic draped over one of the posts. "The grounds are yours if you wish for solitude." "No need," Sigrid said, drawing her axe. "The space is large enough for two." Bjorn studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Indeed." He pulled the tunic over his head but made no move to leave, instead taking a position at the far side of the grounds to continue his exercises. Sigrid began her own practice routine, her axe slicing through the air in patterns she had refined over years of training. She was acutely aware of Bjorn's presence, conscious that her skills were being assessed by eyes far more experienced than those of the village men who typically dismissed her abilities without true consideration. The knowledge should have made her self-conscious, but instead, it drove her to greater precision and control. After completing her initial warm-up, she moved to one of the wooden posts, striking at it from various angles to build strength and accuracy. The solid thud of her axe biting into wood established a rhythm that allowed her mind to focus solely on the movements of her body, the weight of her weapon, the angle of each strike. "Your technique is unusual." Bjorn's voice broke through her concentration. He had paused in his own practice and was watching her with analytical interest. "Self-taught?" Sigrid extracted her axe from the post. "Mostly. My father showed me the basics before he died. The rest I learned by watching the warriors train and through trial and error." "Impressive," he said without a hint of condescension. "Most self-taught fighters develop bad habits that get them killed in their first real battle. You've avoided the common mistakes." The genuine assessment, free of the usual qualifiers about her gender, was refreshing. "I had strong motivation to learn correctly. Being a woman already placed me at a disadvantage. Poor technique would have given the men more reason to exclude me from raids." Bjorn nodded, understanding the reality of her position without requiring further explanation. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward her axe. After a moment's hesitation, Sigrid handed over her weapon. Bjorn tested its weight and balance with the critical eye of someone who had handled many such tools of death. "Good craftsmanship, lighter than most, but that suits your build and fighting style." He returned the axe, then drew his sword again. "Would you indulge me in some practice? It's been some time since I faced an opponent with an axe as their primary weapon." The invitation surprised her. Men in Ravnfjord rarely asked to spar with her, fearing either defeat at a woman's hands or accusations of harming her if they prevailed. "You're not concerned about injuring the Jarl's guest?" she asked, only half joking. A smile touched Bjorn's scarred face. "I'm more concerned about explaining my own injuries to my men. We'll use care, but not excessive restraint. I've no interest in false contests." They began circling each other, weapons at the ready. Sigrid studied Bjorn's movements, noting the slight favoring of his left side that revealed his old injury. He would compensate for it through experience and anticipation, but it remained a potential weakness if she could press him hard enough. Bjorn struck first, a testing thrust that she parried easily with the haft of her axe. She countered with a swift swing that he evaded with a step back, measuring her reach and speed. For several minutes, they exchanged light blows, each assessing the other's style and capabilities. Gradually, the intensity increased. Sigrid found herself fully engaged, her awareness narrowing to the immediate exchange of attack and defense. Bjorn fought with a controlled precision that challenged her without overwhelming her skills. When he exploited a weakness in her technique, he did so in a way that demonstrated the flaw without humiliating her. When she successfully pressed him, he acknowledged it with a nod of approval rather than redoubling his efforts to reassert dominance. It was, Sigrid realized, the most honest and educational combat training she had ever received. There was no posturing, no attempt to prove superiority, just the clean exchange of martial skill between two warriors with mutual respect. Their sparring attracted attention as the settlement began to stir. Soon, a small crowd had gathered at the edge of the training ground, warriors from both Ravnfjord and Bjorn's company, watching with varying degrees of surprise and interest as the newcomer leader engaged in serious combat practice with the settlement's female outcast. Sensing the audience, Bjorn called a halt. "Enough for today," he said, lowering his sword. "You fight well, Sigrid Haraldsdottir." She lowered her axe, aware of the eyes upon them and the whispers already spreading among the onlookers. "As do you, Bjorn Grimsson, even with your old wound." "We all carry some damage," he replied quietly, his gaze meeting hers with an understanding that went beyond the physical injuries of combat. Then, raising his voice for the benefit of those watching, he added, "Your settlement is fortunate to have warriors of such caliber." The plural, warriors, not simply men, was deliberate, Sigrid knew, a small gesture, but one that positioned her as equal to the male fighters of Ravnfjord in the eyes of an outsider whose martial prowess none could question. Whether it would alter any perceptions remained to be seen, but the intention behind it was clear. As they gathered their equipment, Bjorn spoke again, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "The Jarl has asked me to lead one of the raiding parties to the southern coast. 3 ships, quick strikes against settlements likely to have limited defenses but valuable goods." Sigrid stilled, instantly alert to the implications. "When do you sail?" 3 days, if the weather holds." He secured his sword at his waist. "I'll need experienced fighters who can move quickly and follow orders without question." The invitation was implicit, but clear. Sigrid kept her expression neutral despite the surge of anticipation that coursed through her. "The Jarl has given you freedom to select your crew?" "Within reason," Bjorn replied. "He understands that a leader must have confidence in those who fight beside him, especially in unfamiliar waters." "And would your men accept a shield-maiden among their ranks?" She asked the question bluntly, needing to understand whether his offer was genuine or merely a kindness he could not actually fulfill. Bjorn's gaze was steady. "My men follow my orders, or they are not my men. Those who fought beside me at Savag saw shield-maidens prove their worth in the shield wall. They will not question your place if I do not." The reference to the famous battle, a massive naval engagement that had occurred several years earlier, caught Sigrid's attention. Few in Ravnfjord had participated in conflicts of that scale, their raiding typically limited to smaller targets. If Bjorn had commanded warriors in such a battle, his experience and rank were greater than she had initially assumed. "The Jarl may have other views," she pointed out. "He has permitted me to train, but rarely allows me to join raids." "Leave the Jarl to me," Bjorn said with quiet confidence. "Be at the docks tomorrow at midday. We'll need to review plans and..." Ensure all who sail understand our strategy." With a final nod, he departed, leaving Sigrid standing alone on the training ground as the gathered crowd dispersed, new gossip already spreading through the settlement. The implications of what had just occurred would ripple through Ravnfjord. Bjorn's public acknowledgement of her skill, the suggestion that she might join the raid, the subtle challenge to the established order that had kept her marginalized, despite her proven abilities. She should feel triumph, Sigrid thought as she walked back toward her dwelling. The opportunity she had sought for years, to be judged solely on her capabilities rather than her gender, seemed suddenly within reach. Yet unease mingled with her satisfaction. Bjorn Grimsson's interest in her skills appeared genuine, but she had learned through bitter experience that men's motives were rarely simple, especially when they involved a woman who defied convention. What did he truly want from her? Was this invitation extended purely on the basis of her fighting ability, or did he have other reasons for wanting her included in his raiding party? And how would the warriors of Ravnfjord, men who had dismissed her for years, react to seeing her given a place of honor by the newcomer whose acceptance they themselves sought? Too many questions with too few answers. For now, Sigrid decided, she would prepare as if the raid were certain. Weapons needed maintenance, provisions had to be gathered, and her knowledge of the southern coastline required refreshing. Whatever Bjorn's true motives, this opportunity was too precious to waste through hesitation or doubt. As she neared her dwelling, Gudrun hurried to intercept her, her expression troubled. "Is it true?" the young widow asked without preamble. "Are you joining Bjorn Grimsson's raid?" News traveled faster than the wind in Ravnfjord. "Nothing is decided yet," Sigrid replied cautiously. "Who told you this?" "Everyone is talking about your morning practice with him," Gudrun said. "They say he fought you as an equal and will include you in his raiding party." Sigrid sighed. Speculation had already transformed possibility into certainty. "The Jarl will have the final say." Gudrun glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot before continuing. "Be careful, Sigrid. There's talk among some of the village men. They don't like an outsider elevating you when they've worked so hard to keep you in your place." "Elevating me to where I rightfully belong based on my skills," Sigrid pointed out. "What would you have me do? Refuse the first reel? Chance I've had to be recognized as a warrior? Of course not," Gudrun said softly. "I know what this means to you. I just fear the resentment it may create." She hesitated. "There's more. My brother overheard Halfdan and some others speaking last night after the feast. They believe Bjorn's interest in you goes beyond your fighting ability." Sigrid felt her face flush with both anger and embarrassment. "Of course they do. Men like Halfdan cannot conceive of a woman being valued for anything other than what lies between her legs." Gudrun winced at the crude phrasing but nodded. "Just be aware. Whatever Bjorn Grimsson's true intentions, others will assign their own meanings to his actions." The warning was kindly meant, and Sigrid squeezed her friend's hand in thanks. "I've never had the luxury of making choices based on what others might think or say. I can't start now." As Gudrun departed, Sigrid entered her dwelling and began methodically checking her equipment. Her axe needed sharpening after the morning's practice. Her shield, rarely used in training but essential for actual combat, required new leather on its grip. Her sea chest, stored under her sleeping platform since her last voyage, would need to be repacked with appropriate clothing for the variable spring weather. The familiar preparations calmed her mind, providing a practical focus that pushed aside both excitement and apprehension. Whether or not the raid actually materialized for her, being prepared harm nothing. By midday, she had completed most of her tasks. As she was applying a fresh coat of oil to her leather armor, a shadow darkened her doorway. She looked up to find Jarl Erik himself standing there, his massive frame blocking most of the light. "Sigrid Haraldsdottir," he said without preamble. "Walk with me." Setting aside her work, Sigrid followed him, acutely aware of the stares that tracked their progress through the settlement. The Jarl rarely sought private conversations with any of his people, let alone the woman most considered a disruption to proper order. He led her to a small rise overlooking the fjord, where the spring breeze carried their words away from curious ears. "Bjorn Grimsson has asked for you to join his raiding party," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon rather than her face. "So I understand," Sigrid replied, keeping her tone neutral. "He speaks highly of your skill with an axe and your strategic thinking." The Jarl turned to study her now. "He rarely offers such praise from what I have observed." Sigrid remained silent, recognizing that the Jarl had more to say. "This presents me with a dilemma," he continued after a moment. "The women of Ravnfjord look to my wife and me to uphold traditions that have served our people well. Allowing a woman to raid alongside men challenges those traditions." "With respect, Jarl," Sigrid said carefully. "Tradition also speaks of shield-maidens, who fought beside male warriors in times of great need. The sagas honor their courage, not condemn their choices." "Indeed," he acknowledged, "but sagas are tales of exceptional circumstances, not guides for daily governance," he sighed, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "Yet we face exceptional times. Harold's ambitions threaten all the northern settlements. We need every capable fighter, and Bjorn Grimsson, whose experience in warfare far exceeds my own, believes you would strengthen his raiding party." Hope flickered within Sigrid, but she kept her expression composed. The Jarl had not yet stated his decision. "There will be conditions," he said finally. "You will be under Bjorn's direct command and responsibility. Your conduct must be beyond reproach. Any action that brings dishonor to Ravnfjord will result in your permanent exclusion from future raids. And you will not expect this exception to become common practice for other women in the settlement." It was more than she had dared hope for, despite the restrictions. "I understand and accept these terms." The Jarl studied her for a long moment. "There is one more matter we must address. Bjorn Grimsson is unmarried, as are you. Your close association on this raid will generate talk, regardless of the actual nature of your relationship." Sigrid felt heat rise to her face. "I have no interest in—" The Jarl raised a hand to stop her. "Your interests are your own, as are his. But perception matters in a small settlement. If your relationship evolves beyond that of leader and warrior, it would be best formalized quickly to avoid unnecessary gossip that could undermine his authority and your hard-won place." The implication was clear. The Jarl would permit her to join the raid, but she would need to navigate the social complications with care, particularly regarding Bjorn Grimsson himself. "That will not be a concern," Sigrid stated firmly. "My focus is on proving my worth as a warrior, nothing more." The Jarl's weathered face showed skepticism, but he nodded. "Very well. Report to the docks tomorrow as Bjorn requested. May your axe strike true and bring honor to Ravnfjord." With that formal blessing, he turned and walked back toward the settlement, leaving Sigrid alone with her thoughts and the vast expanse of the fjord stretched before her. After years of fighting for recognition, she had finally won the chance to prove herself beyond Ravnfjord's protective boundaries. The cost was accepting an outsider's sponsorship and the complicated perceptions that came with it. Was it worth it? The question barely formed before she knew the answer. For the chance to live as the warrior she knew herself to be, she would endure far worse than wagging tongues and speculative glances. Let them talk. She would let her axe speak for her when the time came. Her path forward was clear now, though not without obstacles. In 3 days, she would sail with Bjorn Grimsson's raiding party, prove her worth in battle, and return with both plunder and respect that even her harshest critics could not deny. The rest, the complications of perception, the uncertainty of Bjorn's true motives, the resistance from traditionalists, were secondary concerns that would resolve themselves in time. Or so she told herself as she watched dark clouds gathering. On the distant horizon, an omen of storms to come both at sea and within the tangled relationships of Ravnfjord itself. The docks of Ravnfjord bustled with activity under the midday sun. 3 longships bobbed gently in the water, their dragon-headed prows facing outward toward the open sea, as if eager to begin their journey. Warriors moved purposefully between the vessels and shore, loading supplies, checking rigging, and making final adjustments to weapons and armor. The excitement of impending raid was palpable, an electric current running through the settlement. Sigrid approached with measured steps, her axe hanging from her belt and shield slung across her back. She had dressed practically in sturdy wool trousers, a leather jerkin over a linen tunic, and well-worn boots that would maintain traction on wet deck planks. Her hair was tightly braided against her scalp to keep it from becoming a liability. In combat, nothing about her appearance spoke of femininity. This was a warrior prepared for the violence and hardship of a raid. Eyes turned toward her as she neared the gathering point where Bjorn Grimsson stood with a group of men around a rough map spread over a barrel top. Conversations quieted momentarily before resuming with increased intensity. Sigrid ignored the stares and whispers, focusing instead on Bjorn and the tactical discussion underway. "The settlement here," Bjorn was saying, indicating a point on the crude map, has minimal defenses according to traders who visited last season. A wooden palisade, perhaps 20 defenders. Their church reportedly holds silver donated by wealthy patrons from the south. One of the Ravnfjord warriors, a barrel-chested man named Otar, who had always treated Sigrid with grudging respect, pointed to another location. "What of this one? Closer to the coast, easier escape if things go badly." "Too obvious a target," Bjorn replied. "It will have been raided before and likely has better defenses now. We seek prey that doesn't expect us." He looked up as Sigrid joined the circle, acknowledging her with a nod that offered neither special welcome nor surprise at her presence. Exactly the treatment she preferred. "Sigrid, you've raided southward before. What can you tell us of these waters?" The direct question before the assembled warriors was deliberate, she knew. He was establishing her value to the expedition immediately, leaving no room for others to question her inclusion. "The currents near that headland are treacherous," she replied, pointing to a jutting peninsula on the map. "We lost 2 men to the sea there 3 seasons ago when our ship was pushed too close to shore. Better to approach from the west, even if it adds half a day's journey." Bjorn considered this, then nodded. "A wise precaution. We have time enough not to risk unnecessary losses." He traced a new route with his finger. "We'll come around here. Instead, make landfall at night and strike at dawn when their guard is lowest." The planning continued for another hour, with Bjorn assigning specific roles to each warrior. Sigrid would scout ahead with 3 others once they made landfall, her lighter footfalls and sharp eyes making her well-suited to the task. The main force would follow once the scouts confirmed the settlement's defenses matched their intelligence. When the meeting concluded, the warriors dispersed to make final preparations before departure the next morning. Sigrid turned to leave, but Bjorn's voice stopped her. "A moment, Sigrid." She faced him, aware of curious glances from those still nearby. "Yes?" "Walk with me." He gestured away from the docks toward a quieter area where they could speak privately. Once they were beyond earshot of others, Bjorn spoke directly. "You'll face challenges on this raid beyond those of battle. Some of these men have never fought alongside a woman. They will watch you for any sign of weakness or hesitation." "I'm aware," Sigrid replied evenly. "It's no different from every day in Ravnfjord." "It is different," Bjorn countered. "In your settlement, you fight their perception daily, but return to your own dwelling each night. On a raid, we live in each other's pockets. There's no respite, no privacy, no escape from their scrutiny." His concern seemed genuine, which unsettled her more than mockery would have. "Why does this matter to you?" Bjorn's scarred face revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Because I need every warrior focused on our objective, not distracted by petty grievances or challenges to authority. Your presence will create friction, whether I wish it or not. And you still chose to include me, Sigrid observed. Why? Because skill matters more than tradition when lives are at stake. His gray eyes held hers steadily. But be prepared. Some will try to provoke you, to prove you don't belong. How you respond will determine whether you're truly accepted. The warning was unnecessary. Sigrid had navigated male hostility all her adult life, but she recognized it was offered in good faith. I won't embarrass you or jeopardize the raid. A faint smile touched his lips. I'm not concerned about embarrassment. I'm telling you this because I've seen good warriors broken by the constant pressure of proving themselves. Pace yourself. Choose your battles carefully. Before she could respond, angry voices rose from the direction of the docks. Bjorn turned sharply, his hand dropping instinctively to his sword hilt. It seems one battle chooses you now. They returned to find Halfdan confronting one of Bjorn's men, their faces inches apart in clear challenge. A circle of warriors had formed around them, some looking uncomfortable, others eagerly anticipating violence. Don't care what Bjorn says, Halfdan was snarling. Taking a woman on raid is asking for the gods' disfavor. She'll bring us bad luck if she doesn't get men killed with her weakness first. The other warrior, Eirik, the young man from the feast confrontation, stood his ground. Our leader values skill above what hangs between your legs. Perhaps if you had more of the former, you'd worry less about the latter. Halfdan's face flushed, dark with rage. His hand moved toward his knife, but froze as Bjorn's voice cut through the tension. Enough. The single word carried such authority that both men stepped back immediately. Bjorn moved into the circle, his presence commanding. Attention without effort. Is this how Ravnfjord prepares for battle? With squabbles worthy of children? His gaze swept the gathered warriors, settling on Halfdan. You question my judgment? Halfdan's bravado faltered under that steel-gray stare, but pride forced him to answer. No disrespect intended to you, Bjorn Grimsson, but taking a woman to raid invites misfortune. Everyone knows this. Everyone? Bjorn's voice remained calm, though an edge had entered it. Strange. I fought at Jorungsavag where shield-maidens stood in the line and held against King Harald's finest warriors. They brought victory, not misfortune. His scarred face hardened. But perhaps you know more of battle than those who were there. The sarcasm hit its mark. Halfdan shifted uncomfortably, caught between backing down and challenging a warrior whose experience and skill clearly outmatched his own. I meant no offense, he muttered finally. I spoke only from concern for the expedition's success. Your concern is noted, Bjorn replied coldly. Now hear mine. Any warrior who cannot follow my orders without question stays behind. Any man who undermines our unity faces my personal displeasure. He let the statement hang in the air, its implications clear to all present. Do I make myself understood? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered men. Halfdan gave a stiff nod, his eyes darting briefly to Sigrid with unmistakable resentment, before he turned and pushed his way through the crowd. Bjorn addressed the remaining warriors. We sail at dawn. Get your rest, check your equipment, make your peace with your gods. Tomorrow we hunt. The gathering dispersed, men returning to their tasks with renewed focus. Sigrid remained still, aware that she had just witnessed Bjorn staking his considerable reputation on her inclusion. The gesture created a debt she hadn't sought and wasn't sure how to repay. You didn't need to do that, she said quietly when only Bjorn remained. I've handled worse from Halfdan before. I didn't do it for you, he replied, though without harshness. I did it for the raid. Division before battle gets men killed. He studied her face for a moment. But now you understand. What I meant. Your presence requires me to assert authority more forcefully than might otherwise be necessary. The implication was clear. Her inclusion came at a cost to him as well. If you prefer, I can withdraw from the raid. The success of the expedition matters more than my participation. Bjorn's expression softened slightly. If I believed that were true, I would never have asked for you. He turned to gaze out at the fjord. Get some rest, Sigrid Haraldsdottir. Tomorrow you begin writing your own saga, not living in the shadow of others' expectations. As she walked back to her dwelling to complete her preparations, Sigrid felt the weight of what lay ahead. This raid represented everything she had fought for, recognition as a warrior based on skill rather than gender. Yet it also carried risks beyond those of normal battle. Failure would not just endanger her life, but would confirm every doubt ever expressed about a woman's place in the shield wall. Success might change perspectives, but would also forever mark her as different, neither fully woman in traditional terms nor fully accepted as a warrior. And there was Bjorn himself, an enigma whose motivations she couldn't fully decipher. His support seemed genuine, his assessment of her skills honest, but experience had taught Sigrid that men in positions of power rarely offered opportunities without expecting something in return. What would Bjorn Grimsson eventually want from the shield-maiden he had elevated against tradition? Such questions would find their answers in time. For now, preparation took precedence over speculation. Sigrid spent the evening sharpening her axe to a razor edge, checking the bindings on her shield and packing her sea chest with only the essentials needed for the voyage. As darkness fell over Ravnfjord, she performed the rituals her mother had taught her. Small offerings to Freya for protection, whispered prayers to Thor for strength in battle. War was coming to the northern settlements, whether through heralds, ambitions, or the constant threat of rival jarls. Ravnfjord would need every sword and axe to survive the changing world. Perhaps this raid would help others see what Bjorn apparently already recognized, that the value of a warrior lay in their skill and courage, not in what lay beneath their armor. With that hope sustaining her, Sigrid finally allowed herself to rest, her dreams filled with salt spray, the rhythm of oars, and the promise of proving herself on shores yet unseen. If this Viking saga has captured your interest, make sure to like and subscribe. Tomorrow's episode will follow Sigrid as the raid begins and unexpected challenges test both her combat skills and her place among the warriors. The longships cut through dawn-misted waters, their dragon prows emerging from the fog like creatures born of Njord's breath. 3 vessels moved in silent formation, oars dipping in perfect rhythm to minimize sound as they approached the sleeping settlement. Golden light touched the eastern horizon, but darkness still clung to the western shoreline where their target lay. Sigrid crouched amidships in Bjorn's lead vessel, her muscles tense with anticipation. She had barely slept during the 3-day voyage, aware of the constant assessment from both Ravnfjord warriors and Bjorn's men. She had worked twice as hard as any man at the oars, refusing offers of relief even when her palms blistered and bled. When not rowing, she had kept watch, studied the coastline, and maintained her weapons, all without complaint or sign of fatigue. Now, as they prepared for landfall, she felt strangely calm. Battle offered clarity that daily life in Ravnfjord never provided. Here, she would be judged solely on her actions in combat, not on conformity to gender expectations. Bjorn moved along the ship with quiet confidence, checking warriors' readiness, and offering brief words of instruction. When he reached Sigrid, his assessment was thorough but impersonal, exactly as he treated every fighter under his command. "You'll scout ahead with Eric, Finn, and Ottar," he reminded her in a low voice. "Stay within signal range. If you encounter resistance, fire arrow signals as planned. 1 for light resistance, 2 for significant, 3 if you must retreat." Sigrid nodded, her hand instinctively checking her quiver. Every arrow had been carefully prepared with distinctive red fletching that would be visible even in dim light. "The rest of us will establish a secure landing point and await your signal before advancing," Bjorn continued. Remember, we want their silver and supplies, not a prolonged battle. Quick strike, minimal casualties on our side. Understood, Sigrid replied. Something flickered in Bjorn's eyes. Not doubt, but a deeper concern. Trust your instincts, he added more quietly. If something feels wrong, don't hesitate to signal retreat. Pride has no place in successful raiding. Before she could respond, he had moved on to the next warrior. The ships were nearly at the landing point now, a sheltered cove a short distance from the settlement itself. Guards were posted at the village walls, but the shore remained unpatrolled, a sign of either confidence or complacency. The vessels glided silently into the shallows. Warriors disembarked in practiced order, securing the ships and establishing a defensive perimeter, while the scouting party prepared to move out. Sigrid strapped her shield to her back, checked her axe, and joined the 3 men assigned to her. Team Eirik, the youngest, looked nervous but determined. Finn, one of Bjorn's warriors, carried the impassive expression of a veteran raider. Ottar, the barrel-chested Ravnfjord man, kept glancing at Sigrid with an unreadable expression. Not hostility, but something more complex. We move in formation, Sigrid stated, taking initiative before Ottar could assume command based on seniority. Finn on point, Eirik and I flanking, Ottar covering our rear. Quick and silent until we reach the settlement edge. She half expected resistance to her leadership, but the men simply nodded. Bjorn's clear trust in her abilities had apparently earned her at least provisional acceptance. The scouting party moved through the pre-dawn forest with practiced stealth. Finn led them, along a game trail that wound toward higher ground, offering a better vantage point of the settlement's defenses. They encountered no sentries or alarm systems, further evidence that these people had grown comfortable in their perceived safety. Within half an hour, they reached a position overlooking the settlement, a modest collection of buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade. A single church with a small bell tower dominated the center, its stone construction standing out among the wooden structures. 2 guards were visible at the main gate, but they appeared relaxed, one leaning against the wall and seemingly half asleep. Defenses match our intelligence, Finn whispered. No unexpected reinforcements visible. Sigrid studied the layout carefully, noting potential escape routes and rally points. We should verify the side entrance before signaling, she suggested. If it's poorly guarded, that's our best entry point. They circled the perimeter, remaining within the forest's cover. The side gate, as expected, had only a single guard who paced with obvious boredom. Beyond the walls, the settlement was beginning to stir. Smoke rose from morning cooking fires, but few people had emerged from their dwellings. Ottar gave a grudging nod of approval. Quick work by the scouting party, and we can be in and out, before they organize any real defense. Sigrid prepared to fire the signal arrow when Eirik suddenly gripped her arm, pointing toward the church. Look, he hissed. A group of armed men had emerged from the church. Not village defenders, but warriors in mail and helmets. They moved with disciplined precision, taking up positions throughout the settlement with the clear intention of preparing an ambush. Thor's hammer, Finn swore softly. Those are Harald's men. This is a trap. The realization hit Sigrid like ice water. Only someone who knew their raid plans could have warned these people in advance. Someone in Ravnfjord, or among Bjorn's own followers, had betrayed them. 3 signal arrows, Ottar muttered. We need to warn the others and retreat immediately. Sigrid knocked the first arrow but hesitated before drawing. If we fire from here, we reveal our position to those warriors. They'll hunt us before we can reach the ships. What choice do we have? Eirik demanded, his young face pale with fear. Sigrid's mind raced through alternatives. I'll move to that ridge, she decided, pointing to a rocky outcrop several hundred paces distant. Fire the signals from there, drawing their attention away from your position and the landing site. You 3 circle back to warn Bjorn directly. That's suicide, Ottar growled. They'll track you down while we escape." "I'm faster in the forest than any of you," Sigrid replied with confidence born of years hunting alone. "And I know how to disappear. This gives us all the best chance of survival." Finn studied her for a moment, then nodded sharply. "She's right. Tactically sound, if dangerous." "Bjorn will have my head if I leave you," Ottar protested. "Bjorn will have all our heads if we fail to warn him of the trap," Sigrid countered. "Go. I'll create the diversion and meet you at the secondary rally point we established." Without waiting for further argument, she slipped away through the underbrush, moving with the silent skill honed through years of hunting. She heard the men departing in the opposite direction as planned, their footfalls fading quickly. The ridge offered a clear line of sight to both the settlement and the distant landing area. Sigrid positioned herself behind a rock formation that provided cover while allowing her arrows to fly unimpeded. Taking a deep breath, she drew her bow and sent the first arrow soaring high, then quickly followed with 2 more. The effect was immediate. Shouts erupted from the settlement as the signals were spotted. Warriors emerged from buildings, scanning the forest edge for intruders. Sigrid remained motionless, watching as a group of 8 armed men exited the main gate and began moving toward the ridge, directly toward her position as she had intended. She allowed herself a count of 30 to ensure the pursuers were committed to her direction before retreating deeper into the forest. The terrain here was her ally. Dense undergrowth, fallen logs, and streams created a natural maze that someone unfamiliar with northern wilderness would struggle to navigate quickly. For nearly an hour, Sigrid led her pursuers on a winding chase, always staying just barely within their tracking ability, close enough to keep them following, but distant enough to remain safely ahead. Each time they began to lose her trail, she deliberately left subtle signs for them to find: a broken branch, a disturbed patch of earth, drawing them farther from both the settlement and the landing area. When satisfied, she had bought enough. Time for the others to escape, Sigrid implemented the final phase of her plan. Crossing a swift-running stream, she leapt from stone to stone until reaching the opposite bank, where she climbed a large oak tree and concealed herself among its spring foliage. The pursuers eventually reached the stream, clearly frustrated by the chase. They searched the banks for signs of her passage but found nothing conclusive. The stones she had used left no tracks, and the hard ground beyond the stream offered no footprints. "She can't have disappeared," one warrior growled. "Spread out and keep searching." "We've been led away from the village like fools," another replied. "This was a deliberate diversion. We should return before the main force attacks." The signal was for retreat, not attack. The raiders will be gone by now. Sigrid remained motionless in her perch as the men argued, eventually splitting into smaller groups to continue the search. None looked up, a common failure of tracking that her father had taught her to exploit since childhood. When all had moved beyond earshot, she descended silently and began making her way toward the secondary rally point, a small bay, several miles down the coast where the ships could reposition if the primary landing site was compromised. The journey took longer than expected. Twice she had to hide as search parties passed nearby, and once she nearly walked into a patrol returning to the settlement. The sun had passed its zenith by the time she approached the rally point, moving with increased caution as she neared the coastline. The sight that greeted her was not what she had expected. 2 longships were drawn up on the shore, not 3. Warriors moved about, loading supplies and preparing for departure. Bjorn stood at the water's edge, his posture rigid as he scanned the tree line. Sigrid emerged from the forest, instantly, aware of the tension that surged through the gathered warriors. Weapons were half drawn before recognition dawned. Bjorn strode toward her, his scarred face revealing uncharacteristic emotion, relief quickly masked by concern. "You live," he stated simply. "As do you," she replied, her eyes scanning the assembled men. "Where is the 3rd ship, and Håkon?" She had noticed the absence of Bjorn's red-bearded lieutenant. Bjorn's expression darkened. Håkon revealed himself as Harald's man. He took a ship and 8 warriors who secretly supported him, fled when your warning came. The betrayal was not entirely surprising. Sigrid had sensed the division among Bjorn's followers from the beginning. So the ambush was set through him. Yes. He dispatched a messenger after our planning meeting, sent word of our destination. Bjorn's voice was controlled, but rage simmered beneath the surface. Had you not warned us, we would have sailed into a massacre. Ottar stepped forward, his previous reservations apparently forgotten. She led the pursuers away from us deliberately, risked herself to ensure our escape. Murmurs of appreciation spread through the gathered warriors. Men who had questioned her presence now looked at her with newfound respect. The transformation was as sudden as it was unexpected. We lost 4 men in the skirmish with Hakon's supporters, Bjorn continued, but saved the majority thanks to your warning and diversion. He glanced at the sky. We must sail with the evening tide. Harald's forces will have ships searching for us by morning. As the warriors returned to their preparations, Bjorn guided Sigrid slightly apart from the others. That was either very brave or very foolish, he said quietly. Perhaps both. It was necessary, she replied simply. He studied her face intently. Most men would have fired the signal and fled with their comrades, not risked themselves alone. I'm not most men, Sigrid pointed out, as everyone has been so eager to remind me. A rare smile touched Bjorn's lips. No, you're not. He hesitated, then added, When Ottar reported what you'd done, He paused, apparently uncomfortable with expressing the depth of his concern. It would have been a poor repayment of your courage to lose you to Harald's men. The admission surprised her, not just the sentiment, but that he would voice it aloud. I don't need special concern, she said, perhaps more sharply than intended. It wasn't offered as the concern of a leader for a shield-maiden, Bjorn replied, his gray eyes holding hers, but as one warrior's respect for another who has proven their worth beyond question. Before she could respond, a shout came from one of the lookouts. The moment broken, Bjorn turned toward the commotion, his hand dropping to his sword hilt. Riders approaching from the east, 6 men moving fast. Warriors scrambled to defensive positions as Bjorn issued rapid commands. Prepare to launch the ships, archers to the tree line. We hold only long enough to ensure all board safely. Sigrid took position with the archers, her bow ready as the riders came into view along the coastal path. But instead of charging, the lead rider raised an arm in greeting, not challenge. Those are Ravnfjord colors, someone called out. Indeed, as the riders drew closer, Sigrid recognized the Jarl's son, Rorik, leading a small group of warriors from their settlement. They reined in at the edge of the beach, hands conspicuously away from weapons. Bjorn Grimsson, Rorik called, dismounting. My father sends warning. Harald's fleet has been sighted north of Ravnfjord. They sail with 20 ships toward our settlement. A ripple of alarm passed through the gathered raiders. 20 ships meant hundreds of warriors, far more than Ravnfjord could hope to repel with its current defenses. The betrayal went deeper than just our raid, Bjorn concluded grimly. Hakon has coordinated with Harald's main force. Rorik nodded. My father requests your immediate return to help organize our defense. He offers blood price for the men lost to treachery and promises that those responsible still in Ravnfjord will face justice. Bjorn considered only briefly before responding. We sail immediately. Your men will join us on the ships. The horses will find their way home or serve as dinner for wolves. As the warriors hastened their preparations, Bjorn turned to Sigrid. This changes matters. Harald comes not just for me, but for all of Ravnfjord. We've suspected his ambitions for months, Sigrid replied. But not that he had agents so deeply placed among us. The coming battle will determine the fate of every person in Ravnfjord, Bjorn said, his voice taking on a formal quality. In such times, old traditions sometimes give way to pressing needs. He met her gaze directly. "I would ask something of you that may seem unexpected." Sigrid tensed, uncertain what request might follow after the day's events. "When we return, I intend to ask the Jarl for your hand in marriage." Of all possible statements, this was perhaps the last Sigrid had expected. She stared at him, momentarily, speechless. "This is not a reward for your actions today," Bjorn continued quickly, "nor a romantic overture born of battle excitement. It is a practical matter. As Harald moves against northern settlements, alliances will determine survival. A marriage between us would strengthen both our positions. You would gain the status that your skills deserve but tradition has denied you, and I would gain a partner whose courage and tactical mind I have come to respect." The proposal was delivered. Like a battle assessment, clear, logical, and utterly devoid of the emotional trappings that usually accompanied such offers. Strangely, this approach resonated with Sigrid far more than flowery declarations of admiration might have. "You've known me barely 13 days, she pointed out. "Most of that time spent either in preparation for battle or actual combat. I've known men for years and understood less of their character than I've seen of yours in these days," Bjorn replied. "Crisis reveals truth more clearly than peaceful times." His expression softened slightly. "I don't ask for an immediate answer. Consider it during our return journey." With that, he moved away to oversee the final preparations for departure, leaving Sigrid to contemplate a proposition as unexpected as it was life-changing. As the ships pushed off from shore, cutting through the darkening waters toward Ravnfjord, Sigrid found herself at a crossroads she had never anticipated. The raid that was to prove her worth as an individual warrior had instead opened a path to a different kind of recognition, one that might finally merge her warrior identity with acceptance in the community that had long rejected her. But would marriage to Bjorn Grimsson represent freedom or simply a different kind of constraint? Would his respect for her abilities endure once the crisis passed, or would old expectations eventually resurface? And what of her own feelings toward this scarred, complex warrior who had seen her value when others had not? These questions tumbled through her mind as oars dipped rhythmically into the waves, driving them homeward toward a settlement now facing immediate threat of destruction. The personal dilemma would need to wait. Harald's forces approached, and survival would require every weapon, every stratagem, and every fighter that Ravnfjord could muster. By the time they sighted the familiar outline of Ravnfjord's cliffs, Sigrid had reached her decision. As warriors prepared to disembark, she approached Bjorn where he stood at the prow, his gaze fixed on the settlement that had offered him sanctuary. "I accept your proposal," she said without preamble. "Not for status or protection, but because you have shown me the respect of an equal. That is worth more than any other consideration." Bjorn turned to her, genuine surprise flickering across his usually stoic features. "You understand this will not be easy? Many will question such a union, especially amid the chaos of impending battle. When has anything in my life been easy?" Sigrid replied with a hint of wry humor. "At least this difficulty I choose freely, rather than having it thrust upon me by others' expectations." A rare smile transformed Bjorn's face, softening the harsh lines of his scar. "Then let us face Harald's forces as promised partners, each strengthening the other." He extended his arm in a warrior's clasp rather than a lover's embrace, a gesture that acknowledged her as comrade first, wife second. Sigrid gripped his forearm firmly, completing the pact between equals. Whatever came next, whether victory, defeat, or some complex outcome between, she would face it not as the settlement's outcast shield-maiden, but as a warrior whose path she had chosen for herself. The ships docked amid growing activity throughout Ravnfjord. Warriors gathered weapons, women prepared provisions, and elders secured valuables. The Jarl himself awaited them at the dock, his expression grave but determined. "Bjorn Grimsson," he called as they disembarked, "your ships return just in time. Harold's fleet will reach us by morning. His gaze shifted to Sigrid, noting her position at Bjorn's side with raised eyebrows but making no comment. We have preparations to discuss, Bjorn replied, and a request to make of you before battle joins us. The Jarl's brow furrowed. What request could take precedence over our defense plans? Bjorn's voice carried across the gathering crowd as he responded. I ask for your blessing to marry Sigrid Haraldsdottir before Harold's ships arrive. Let us face tomorrow's battle as husband and wife, united in purpose as we are in skill. A murmur rippled through the assembled villagers. The Jarl's expression registered shock, then calculation as he assessed the implications of such an alliance at this critical moment. This is unexpected, he said finally, though perhaps fitting in these unusual times. He studied both their faces before continuing. Very well. The union will be recognized. We'll conduct the necessary ceremonies tonight, brief though they must be. In the fading light of sunset, with Harold's fleet approaching and uncertainty hanging over all their futures, Sigrid found herself standing before the settlement that had long marginalized her, hands bound to Bjorn's with sacred cords, as the Jarl pronounced the ancient words that would unite their paths. The ceremony was hastened by necessity, stripped of most traditional elements, yet somehow more meaningful for its stark simplicity. No elaborate feast followed, only shared cups of mead and hurried preparations for the battle to come. As darkness fell fully over Ravnfjord, Sigrid stood with Bjorn on the settlement's highest point, surveying the defensive preparations underway below. Her hand unconsciously touched the marriage band now encircling her arm, a physical symbol of the transformation these 13 days had wrought in her life. Do you regret it already? Bjorn asked quietly, noting her gesture. No, Sigrid replied truthfully. Whatever comes tomorrow, I face it on my own terms. Not as an oddity tolerated at the edges of society, but as a warrior whose place has been earned and acknowledged. Bjorn nodded, understanding in his gray eyes. That is all any of us can truly ask of life, to stand or fall according to our own choices. Together they watched the distant horizon where, come morning, Harold's ships would appear. The battle ahead would test not just their fighting skills, but the strength of the unconventional bond they had formed. Yet for the first time in her adult life, Sigrid felt a sense of belonging, not despite her warrior nature, but because of it. The shield-maiden rejected for being too fierce had found her match in a war-weary raider who recognized the warrior. In her eyes, when others saw only a woman who refused to conform, whether their story would end in victory or tragedy remained for the Norns to decide. But it would be their saga to write together, each valuing the other for the very qualities others had feared. If you've enjoyed this Viking saga of a shield-maiden who found her rightful place through courage and determination, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We bring history's forgotten warriors to life in every episode, telling stories of those who defied convention and carved their own paths through the world. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest tales from the Viking Age.